You're listening to Strange by Nature, your guide to the strange, weird, unbelievable, and improbable wonders of the natural world.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here today. I'm Kirk Mona, and joining me are Rachel Gimza and Victoria Thompson. We're all naturalists who together have scoured the world for weird and wonderful wonders, just to please your mammalian brain's desire for novelty. Isn't that nice? Let's do this.
Welcome to the show. We're getting started I get to start us off this week. I've got Victoria.
Rachel, you're not...
And
I gotta interrupt you.
Yeah,
You're not just starting this week. You're starting a whole new year of the show.
Well, yeah, I am. Huh. Well, good thing I have a doozy then.
So not excited about it.
Well, I'm excited about it, but I'm like, is this topic good enough? Nah, it is. It's gonna be fun.
Well, okay. Just excited that we're starting a whole nother year here after last week with Brett coming in with our quiz show. If you didn't hear that one, go back and listen to it.
It was wild.
Yet another edition of Eat, Ride, Jacket.
I'm still traumatized by the tapeworm. Actually.
Yeah.
I think there were 2 tapeworm appearances.
Awful.
Ugh. Not okay.
Well,
what do you have for us?
All right. So I thought how I wanted to start this new year or season or however we want to call it of the podcast. Sure. And I was thinking about the topic, and I wanted to highlight something that happened or that I talked about, I think this last year. It happens in March, and it is absolutely beautiful because what I am covering is one of the contenders of March Mammal Madness.
Oh yes, you are very into that.
I was so into it. I actually won. My nature center does the whole thing, and we all compete against each other, and I won last year. So 2024, I was the champion of my RELC. So, woohoo!
Way to go!
Thank you.
You're the reigning champion.
I'm
currently.
the reigning champion at the moment, and we will see.
The soon to be defeated.
Potentially. I don't know. I'm pretty smug and I'm pretty confident, actually.
Kirk.
Yeah, you are.
I don't know.
Well, I'm just saying, the higher you rise, the harder you fall.
I don't know. I think I have a pretty good bracket. We'll see, but I think it's pretty good.
Okay.
For those who maybe haven't listened that far back or don't know about it, March Mammal Madness, it doesn't only include mammals, which I know is a point of contention for many people. It's mostly
pretty weird.
It is a little weird. It's mostly because it works for the alliteration aspect of it. It's the scientific nerdy version of the March Madness for basketball brackets that happen, except this is where different species are matched up in some sort of hypothetical battle. It's really cool. It actually for March Mammal Madness, it has a lot of teaching resources, so it can be used as an educational resource for teachers in classrooms to be able to learn about different species and learn about adaptations and all of these pieces. So there's a lot of education that goes into this.
Yeah.
And then it's also fun because then you get to have these species battle it out and just have a great time. It includes a lot of peer-reviewed research. It's done through Arizona State University. It was started by Dr. Ann Stone in 2013. But it's also just really fun and nerdy. They have tournament-style announcements. There's an entire Spotify playlist that they have. And this year, fun thing that is brand new, they're doing animated recaps. Hold the phone, everybody.
Okay, cool.
So they're really going in hard. It's so fun.
Phone is being held.
That's like...
It's a big
either
production.
They got some great volunteers or their budget got bigger.
I looked at the amount of people who are part of this, and it is a pretty large team. So I think it's a good section of the department, and then they have roped in volunteers. Anyway, so we're headed towards this particular non-mammal's home, but it is part of the contention. It is part of the March mammal bracket. We're headed over to the tidal mangrove mudflats, mostly in the Indo-Pacific. There are some of this particular creature that live in Polynesia, in Malaysia, in Australia, just a lot in the Philippines, just kind of everywhere in that space.
Okay.
And it's a pretty amazing little fish.
A fish?
A fish.
Huh.
A fish from Rachel?
Okay.
I know. Wild. I'm shocking. I told you. I thought really long and hard. What animal could I bring? And it had to be a fish. Come on. Have either of you heard of mud skippers before?
Oh yeah, I've heard the name.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with them.
I'm dredging something up, so to speak. That was unintentional.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Thank you, Victoria. For those of you who are not as familiar with mud skippers, be it Kirk or Victoria, and I'm sure I'm just refreshing both of you. My goodness.
Yeah, please do.
Think of a fish. Think of like a stereotypical fish. All right? Have that in your brain.
Okay.
All right?
Got it.
It is not like a super colorful. It's a brown kind of color. Now move the eyes of the fish to the top of the head, kind of like a cartoon frog.
Oh, okay.
Okay, sure.
Okay. The males will have some colorful dots. When I say colorful, they'll all be one color, but the color changes from species to species. There's like around 25-ish different species, 23, 25 species of mud skipper. Collect them all, truly. And they could be like red, green, or blue. The max size of a mud skipper is around 30 centimeters or 12 inches long. All right. So that's about a foot from head to tail. All right.
Sure.
We got this clear picture in our head of what a mud skipper is.
Absolutely.
Brown fish, eyes on top of the head, colorful dots, about
foot long,
30 centimeters long. Got it.
Oh, also have it on land.
Now,
yeah, that's what I remember.
That is not. I'm going to have to amend my mental picture of what you were describing.
Good.
On land was not a checkbox I had checked.
You know what? I'm not surprised. It's not a typical
checkbox.
Not so much, right? We imagine fish and think of fish as, being in the water. That is not really the
not skipping across the mud.
Exactly. That's why they get their name. They spend a majority of their time. Oh, we'll get into it. We'll spend more of their anyway. So it's on land. I know I talked about the epaulet shark, which walks on land as well. The mud skipper takes this to the next level. So the epaulet shark is a shark that is able to walk on land for a couple of hours. All right. But not necessarily as long as a mud skipper. So a mud skipper, and I'm speaking in generalities since there's 23, 25 species,
sure.
They walk on land. They use their pectoral fins, so those front fins that you would imagine on the side, they use those as walking. Or as like legs, and they are able to walk around on land. So they have really well developed like pectoral muscles. And they really do treat those fins very much like legs. And they are walkers. They're not like hoppers or bounders or anything like that. They walk to the point where they walk around on the mud flats when the tide is low, but it spends over 3/4 of its time on land, not in water.
Wow. That is so much time.
That's
most of the time. We will definitely
Yeah.
get into it. It's actually to the point where if they spend too much time just in water, they have the capacity to drown.
What?
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 They have gills
fish will-
and they can drown.
That's so confusing.
Okay.
So
Why? Do you know? Can you explain why?
Yeah, so the way that they use their gills is how they breathe is uh they have to keep moist, which I know everyone loves that word. They are able to breathe
Love the word
partially.
moist.
Yeah, they partially breathe through the membrane in their skin and around by their gills, and they use a wet mud to help keep them hydrated. So if it's just straight water, it just fills them up too quickly. Their gills are much more used to processing the water slower, so that way they can breathe rather than like just having it always like completely available in the way that happens in water. And so
Interesting.
they just they have to keep
like
them
mud.
moist but not wet, I guess.
Huh.
It's wild.
That's weird.
Oh, you think that's weird? It's even weirder because they spend so much
good.
time out in the mangroves. Primarily, they're like insectivores. They'll like catch like little crayfish. Depending on the species, they'll catch little whatever bugs they can find and such. Some of them will also eat
Sure.
like bugs or like berries and such like that. But because they're in mangrove swamps, some of them have even learned and developed the ability to climb trees. That's right.
What?
We found a fish that can
Rachel.
climb a tree.
No. Oh my God. What?
Now, can they climb well or far?
Is this looking
No.
for food?
Most of it is to like keep out of the way of like other predators and such, but they will climb up they will climb up when it comes to like to look for some food. Because they spend most of their time out of the water. So yeah, they'll climb up for food. It's insane. The fact that they are able to do that,
cool.
it is nuts. Yeah, so they can climb trees. They are also, I mentioned that they have really well developed pectoral muscles because they use their pectoral fins to like walk around. It's to the point where even in their mating displays, the males can be pretty territorial, and they do a couple of different things to attract females to them and like compete with each other. One of those ways is to like open their mouths and like try to be as big as possible.
Okay.
But they also will do their best to leap as high as they possibly can from in front of the females. They've documented them to be able to leap up to 2 feet from the mud in the air.
Wow.
Wow.
Just using those pectoral fins, huh?
Yeah, just really like they're not fast, but they're able to get some and then be able to jump from the mud, which is wild. Yeah. I found out about these. I've had them on my list on and off, I think, but they mostly were kind of they're fine. Nah, man, they're wild. And they have like they'll use their dorsal fin too as like a threat display and like fan it out. It's a whole thing. Mud skippers are wild.
Nice.
That's
really cool. I hadn't really thought about mud skippers, but I have spent some time down in the Everglades, in the mangroves down there. I did a trip where we very oddly went canoeing through the Everglades, and most people would go kayaking. But we're Minnesotans, so we brought a bunch of canoes down to the Everglades. The Rangers thought we had lost our minds.
Of course.
But it's really great because like there's no portaging like there would be up, say, in the boundary waters and out next
Right.
to the woods because you're just going through all these channels and things. But one of the things that never really occurred to us, we were pretty young when we did this, was that because this water is connected to the ocean, there's also tides.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was spots where you'd be in an area and you're like, oh, we're just on this lake. And all of a sudden the water would be visibly draining out of the lake.
I think you've told this story before.
I may have
You
told the story on the
have.
podcast. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it was to our patrons or not. I told the whole story, but it's like, you can see why if you're in one of those places where the water is rapidly draining out, why that would be useful to be a fish who can be out of the water, because the water drained out of some of these sort of lakes so fast
Yeah.
that fish might not have time to like get to another spot, where there's
Yeah.
water. So it was I could see how being in a spot that is affected by tides could very much lead to the need for being able to be out of water for a fish. That's really cool to see.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very cool to see. But yeah, since they're able to like spend so much time outside of the water, and the fact that they actually make little burrows in the mud with they scoop mud out with their mouth and then make a little burrow.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, that was weird, but it's not the weirdest thing.
No,
to
definitely not
happen.
the weirdest thing, right?
I mean, you spend so much time, like, this is kind of really fascinating because how much further down the line is there going to be like some sort of evolutionary pressure where they spend more, like, even less time in the water, like, when do they like
Well, it's happened before, yeah.
I know. So it's like really fascinating to see that. It's nuts, y'all. Mud skippers are wild, and I needed to talk about them with all of you. So that's how I wanted to
thanks
start
for
this
sharing.
this season, was mud skippers. My sources this week were the Ocean Conservancy, Scripps Institute had some great information, the San Francisco Zoo, Wikipedia, and then I had a National Library of Medicine article actually that all had to do with mud skippers and their genetic adaptations to an amphibious lifestyle was the article. And it had some really interesting things. I didn't include much, but they were pretty fascinating, and good job on that particular article. So, yeah.
Nice.
We are going to take a quick break, and when we return, it'll be Victoria.
Andrew Sweetman needed to solve a mystery. Where was the dark oxygen coming from?
Ooh, dark
I gotta
oxygen.
take this
I feel
off
like I've
my
heard
list.
that term before.
Oh, I saw this. I didn't look into it more.
All right.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I know I've heard of this. Tell me more, because it's gonna come back to me.
Well, Andrew Sweetman was leading a team at the Scottish Association for Marine Science that was doing a study funded by a deep sea mining company of a zone in the North Pacific Ocean. And they were assessing the area to try to determine what effects deep sea mining might have. This area
sounded
has
familiar.
Yeah, this area has nodules, and the nodules contain multiple metals, including copper, nickel, manganese, and cobalt, which are all quite valuable in the modern economy. So to do this assessment, they set up experimental chambers on the seafloor to look at different things that might affect oxygen consumption in those areas. And just for a little background, the understanding of oxygen use in the ocean is that it's produced by photosynthetic organisms like algae. And then it cycles through the ocean's currents. And on the seafloor, oxygen is used by animals for respiration and also by the oxidation of different compounds that are found there. But basically it's produced up where the sunlight is, and then it's consumed on the various places, but on the seafloor it's not produced, they thought.
Yeah.
So these experiments included stuff like
Right.
adding biomass, biomass in the form of dead algae. They tried adding dissolved carbon and nitrogen compounds. They added cold surface seawater that had been filtered of all particles with varying concentrations of oxygen, kind of see what happened. And for each of these experiments, and also for all of the controls, they came up with the same puzzling result. Oxygen at the end of the experiment was higher than at the beginning.
Yep.
And their data
What?
showed that the oxygen was being produced at a fairly steady rate over a time span of hours or days. There was no known source for this so-called dark oxygen, and they tried ruling out one by one the various possible sources they could think of. So they figured out it was not accidentally being introduced by their experimental methods. These chambers, when they were lowered from the surface, had valves up top that would release any trapped air as they were lowered down from the surface. And in any case, any oxygen that was trapped like that would be instantaneously dissolved under the pressure of the ocean,
Okay.
rather than developing over time, as was actually seen in the experimental results. They looked at the plastic that the chamber was made of, and it's inert and stable under these conditions. And it also wouldn't account for the variability in the oxygen production seen among different experimental treatments and controls.
Okay.
So like some of the chambers produced more oxygen or at higher rates than others, but they all wound up with more, and it all was produced pretty steadily. They were able to rule out like currents and stuff bringing more oxygenated water in from somewhere else.
Okay. Yeah, just one by one, knocking those out, right?
Yep. They also measured dark oxygen production in sealed core samples from the seafloor sediments that they had taken and then brought up to the surface.
Crazy.
And in some of these, they introduced a mercury-based poison that would have killed any like oxygen-producing bacteria that might have been present there.
Okay.
The oxygen also appeared when they tested only the metallic nodules without any sediment accompanying them.
There you go.
So it did seem that the oxygen was being produced by these nodules somehow.
Which doesn't sound right.
Yeah. How does metal produce oxygen?
To be clear, like when they were testing the nodules, they were in seawater, but like it was just a nodule in the seawater. Okay. And in addition, there was a correlation between the nodule surface area in a sample and the amount of oxygen that was produced.
Okay, progress.
Yeah.
All right.
So one idea was that it might be radiolysis, which is you have radiation energy. It can separate like water into hydrogen and oxygen. So from the radioactive decay of naturally occurring radioactive elements that show up everywhere and also in these nodules. And there was some, but it was a very small amount. It did not account for what they were seeing.
Couldn't account for everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similarly, they also excluded the reduction of manganese oxide under the conditions of the seafloor.
Okay.
That's like one of the compounds that's present in these nodules, and like if it gets reduced, then the oxygen part of the manganese oxide is released as oxygen.
Okay, the oxide, okay.
And again, it produced a little bit, but not very much. So total, the manganese oxide and the radiolysis would contribute only 0.5% of what they were seeing.
Oh wow!
What?
Okay, so there's something else big going on here.
So that left them with their remaining hypothesis, which was that these metallic nodules were acting as low voltage batteries that were electrolyzing seawater.
What? Hold on. These little nodules that are naturally occurring on the bottom of the ocean are
yes
acting like little batteries?
Yes, they are.
So it's in salt water, so that part
Yeah.
makes sense. But traditionally, for
Huh.
some sort of electrolysis to happen, you need like an anode and a cathode, two different kinds of metals. Is that,
Well,
you think
yes,
that's in there?
they're polymetallic nodules.
Okay.
So,
Wild.
as you said, Kirk, electric charges can be created when two metals are placed near each other. And
Hold
in
on.
fact,
Let
the very
me
first
call Kirk something here. Hold on. Nerd.
Here it
Keep
comes.
going.
Look, I'm proud of my knowledge. I'm not going
Rachel,
to.
I'm aware.
I'm not going to take
yes,
shade
I
from
know.
you.
we're all nerds here.
I know.
Yeah, we are.
That's like you calling me a nerd, Rachel, is
You're the one who
real
was
rich.
geeking out about March
Real
Mammal Madness.
rich. Yeah.
No, it's very
woman
fair.
who was
Nah. It was
Telling us
just...
something March Mammal Madness is calling me a nerd. Oh, ouch.
I say it in the most loving way, Kirk.
Of course. Of course.
At any rate, the very first electrochemical battery was created by Italian physicist Alessandro Volta in 1800, and that consisted of alternating thin plates of zinc and copper separated by paper soaked in salt water.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and since these nodules have multiple types of metal, I think they are kind of deposited in layers, actually, in some kind of way.
Yeah.
They can produce a small electric charge, and they measured
That is so cool.
they measured them, and they can, like, depending on the size and whatnot of the nodules, they can be up to 0.95 of a volt.
Whoa.
Okay.
Nice.
And
That's
the
considerable.
amount of electricity needed to electrolyze water is about 1.5 volts. That's the amount of a AA battery. So it's not that much. And the presence of two or more of these nodules near each other like combines to produce enough charge to electrolyze significant amounts of water to oxygen and hydrogen.
That is nuts.
Yeah.
Wild.
Now, this is pretty new research. Needless to say, there's a lot that's still not understood about the details of this oxygen source. For example, how long the nodules can produce electricity, what rate, their function. It seems to vary depending on how much sediment they're covered by.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But this discovery does have some profound implications.
Yeah, it does.
First of all, given that this research was sponsored by a deep sea mining company, it shows that mining these nodules could be significantly more destructive to seafloor habitats than originally thought.
Sure, they love
Because
that.
the oxygen produced, yeah. I mean, kudos to them for, I don't know if they could have squashed
Publishing
the
it.
publication, but yeah. I mean, this was performed by independent researchers who were contracted, but still.
Gotcha.
So the source of oxygen is likely to be significantly responsible for a lot of the biodiversity found in these areas. And in fact, some areas not too, like in this general region of the Pacific, were experimentally mined in the 1980s. And when they were reassessed in 2017, like quarter century later, there had been very little recovery, either of animals in the area, not even much recovery of microbial communities. It was sort of like a wasteland still.
Oh, wow.
25 years
That's
later,
not, that's not great.
Yeah. Second, even more profoundly, this raises questions about the origins of oxygen-using life on this planet.
Sure does.
Yeah.
Previously, it was thought that the evolution of organisms, or like aerobic organisms, had to wait until photosynthesis occurred,
Mm-hmm.
and photosynthetic life was already there.
Yeah, we talked about that on the show, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. But it now appears possible that aerobic life could first have developed on the seafloor before the appearance of oxygen-producing microbes and whatnot.
Huh. That's
so.
Which,
but I mean,
which then makes those microbes ready to just absolutely dominate and take over once the great oxygenation event of Earth happens. So that's wow.
Yeah, so just really
So cool.
fascinating research. I can't wait to learn more about this as more is discovered. My sources this week were this paper by Andrew Sweetman and colleagues. It was published in Nature Geoscience in July 2024. And the title is Evidence of Dark Oxygen Production at the Abyssal Seafloor. And then there was an article in Cosmos about the research that was a little helpful with some of the points by Ellen Fidian, also from July 2024. And then a blog post from DSM Observer. DSM stands for Deep Sea Mining. From May 2020 on that long-standing disturbance in previously mined areas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super cool. I felt like
Wild.
it sounded familiar. I know Rachel said she had it on her list. Like maybe when I was researching something else for the show, I'd come upon this story. I'll leave tabs up on my computer. And sometimes they get saved to a topic and sometimes they don't. And I feel like this one, I feel like maybe I opened the story and never really got able to do a deep dive on it. So that's awesome.
For me, like whenever, like, I don't know if this happens to y'all, but when you open a new tab somewhere and it gives you a bunch of suggestions of stories and news things that you might find interesting, it's come up, Dark Oxygen came up on that for me a couple different times. So that's why I recognized when you said it. I didn't know anything about it, but I was like, oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah.
One thing we've learned is that doing a show like this will really, really mess with your search algorithms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get some weird stuff. Which
also,
is
being in nursing school also really messes with your search algorithms.
I bet.
Not surprised there.
Anyway, that's what I have. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, it'll be Kirk.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I want to start my segment off here with a question.
Okay.
So we know that frogs can sing, obviously, as they do so in the springtime. Hopefully be doing that soon where we live. But can either of you think of a song that was made famous because it was sung by a frog?
Well,
Rainbow Connection.
There it is.
Oh,
you got there.
I think I would have gotten there eventually. I was sort of thinking of that Disney movie, The Princess and the Frog, but the songs are not that famous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Rainbow Connection, or if you're not familiar, that's Why Are There So Many Songs About Rainbows?
Right.
Was, of course, sung by Kermit the Frog, which was voiced by Jim Henson. It was actually, if you're not familiar, it was actually the opening song in the opening scene of the Muppet movie, which came out in 1979, and it's still a classic. And though it may seem mind-boggling, it may seem mind-boggling to our younger audiences today who were not alive at the time. The song reached number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100 in late November of that year.
It's a beautiful song.
That's how big of a hit this was. By the way, for our Australian listeners, and I know there's a lot of you, you should know that in Australia it reached number 14 on the charts in Australia. So they were even bigger fans. Now, it did lose out and didn't win the Grammy for Best Original Song that year. Apparently, the song that won was It Goes Like It Goes. I listened to that song, and I can confidently say I've never heard it before in my life.
Yeah, I've never heard that
one. Though?
Pretty rapidly faded into obscurity. No, it is not a banger at all.
Meanwhile, Rainbow Connection persists on as it well should.
It does. And younger listeners may also know the song as they actually reused it again in the 2011 Muppets movie. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's had a lot of staying power. So the Rainbow Connection, if you haven't heard it, is the song where Kermit the Frog is sitting on a log in a swamp and playing banjo. Mm-hmm. And there literally was, a puppeteer like submerged in a barrel in the water. It was pretty wild how they got this shot.
There's some wild things on how they did the puppeteering and everything. We could have a different podcast about that. Keep going.
We could, yeah. But he's singing a song, playing the banjo, and he's dreaming about being something more and following his passion. And the whole reason I'm bringing this up is that I randomly heard this song on the radio last week, and it got me thinking. And not about dreams or ambition or making that rainbow connection, but rather about the structure of a frog's eye. Because the big question in my head was, hold on a moment. Can frogs even see rainbows?
That's a good question.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Huh.
I think this is a big song in our culture, all about this frog dreaming about rainbows, and I'm like, I'm not sure he can even see that rainbow.
Well,
So that's
but
what I
he's
want
heard
to
all
talk
the
about this
songs
week.
about rainbows.
That's true. Can frogs see rainbows? Well, let's figure it out. We've talked on the show before about how different animals see the world differently, right?
Mhm.
And depending on their evolutionary needs, animals often see very different sets of colors than we do. A good example is nocturnal hunters. So a quick primer here. There's two structures in your eyes that can detect light. There's rods and cones. The rods are the ones that are very sensitive to light, but usually make it so they don't give us color vision.
Mm-hmm.
They're just good at detecting light. Cones are very sensitive to colors, but they don't work well in low light.
Wait.
Correct.
So if you think about walking around in the dark, we can see shapes and such, but we don't see bright colors in low light. Everything just sort of turns gray. And I think we often when we think about this, but tonight, turn the lights off and kind of walk around in your house or something, maybe, or walk around in the moonlight, and you're like, oh yeah, everything's sort of shades of gray, right? You really can't see the color because there's not enough energy to activate those cones in your eye.
Right.
And cones just don't work. They're very sensitive to color, but they don't work well in that low light.
Now, clarifying question, Kirk.
Yeah.
Is this structure of rods and cones, is that common in other species outside of humans? Like, is that found throughout the animal kingdom?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Cool.
These are structures that are found throughout the animal kingdom. There are differences between the animals. That's part of what we're going to get into.
Okay.
So my initial question was, okay, do frogs even have cones? Like,
Right.
can they even see in color? And they do eat other animals.
Right.
So like they're somewhat predators, even though they're often prey animals. And some of them also spend time underwater, which is a low light environment, or they live in dense rainforests where light is dim. So I would not be surprised if they didn't see color. And part of the reason animals sometimes don't see color well is they want to boost their low light vision. There's only so much room for how many rods and cones you can pack into your eyes. And we as humans see a lot of color, and we've sacrificed a lot of our low light vision by having extra cones in our eyes, which gives us really great color perception. But there's not much room for those rods left, so we don't see well. Some predators, especially nocturnal predators, or animals that don't want to be eaten by nocturnal predators, will sacrifice and not have as many cones in their eyes, have extra rods, so they can really see well in low light. But that means, there's just no room for those cones in your eye. You're not going to see color well. And then some animals will just be missing, like one of them, for example, dogs. They can see color, but they can't see all the colors that we see. I think it's pretty funny too. One of the most common colors you see for dog toys is red, and dogs can't see red. So it's like the colors on dog toys at the pet store, those are for the humans being like, ooh, this is pretty. Dogs can see, I think they see like greens and blues pretty well. So like those are the colored dog toys you want to get to
which
excite your
makes
dog.
sense.
Okay, but Kirk, I have a possible counterpoint about frogs.
Okay, yeah.
Frogs are insect eaters, and a lot of insects have venom or poison and use warning coloration opposed to medic coloration. So I would think it might be
some frogs
evolutionarily
use poison or like use coloration as well.
Absolutely. These are great points. So there was all this evidence out there that might point one way or the other, and I was like, I got to look up the research, right? Because like I'm not gonna be able to tease this out just by looking at it.
Right. And
so I did some
also,
digging, and I discovered
it has to have been done. Somebody has to have looked at the eyes of a frog and determined this, right? Because we've been able to how many schools have dissected frogs?
Lots and lots, but that's mostly looking at like macro structures. We're talking about things like in the eye, like rods and cones. You're not gonna be seeing that with some like high school students dissecting a frog. So I did some digging, and I discovered this is actually an area where we need a lot more research. There have been tons of studies on I do
Okay.
have an answer for you. Don't worry, it's not one of those.
Oh,
There
good.
has been tons of studies on mammal vision and bird vision, even reptile vision, but for whatever reason, amphibians have been super neglected when it comes to studying their vision, which maybe amphibians are happy about because it does involve removing the eyes from the animals to do it. So, the amphibians may be happy about that, but it's not been an area that's been studied much. So there have been a few studies, and one thing we do know is that most amphibians are trichomats. So notably, another animal you may be familiar with, humans are also trichomats, meaning 3 colors.
Red,
And
green,
I'm
and blue
over
cones.
Exactly. Going to oversimplify this, but they got the cones that can see the red, green, and the blue. And once you can see those 3 colors, you can then mix varying degrees of them, and from there you can see every color in the rainbow. So most frogs are trichomats, so therefore you're like, boom, they've got red, green, and blue
They can see the
cones.
rainbow.
They do see in a pretty similar overlap of colors as well to humans being a trichromat. So like they probably see colors pretty similar to us. So you go, bingo. They can see those colors. They should also be able to see all the colors of a rainbow.
Right.
And when I was digging through this, though, I discovered something way more interesting to me than can frogs see the colors of the rainbow.
Okay.
And this is fascinating. And while most frogs have not been tested around the world, those that have been tested have shown that frogs can actually see really well in low light, as I was kind of suspecting maybe they could.
Right.
And frogs actually see in low light using a specialized set of rods that, unlike our rods and our eyes, can see color in low light.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I was like, okay,
so
hold on.
frogs have more advanced vision than people in some ways.
Absolutely. So if you think about the reason rods, I think, don't necessarily see colors in humans is that we have one kind of rod. And so it is basically detecting that light is there or light isn't there. There's really nothing to compare it to. When we have the cones with the 3 colors, we're comparing how much they are. We're seeing kind of where I'm getting both red and blue cones activated. That must be purple I'm looking at, right? But if you really only have one kind of rod, I suppose your brain could interpret that as a single color, but it doesn't. It just comes across as gray. What we found out is that some of the frogs that have been tested actually have some rods that are sensitive to blue light and some that are sensitive to green light. And so that's kind of this 2 mix of different kinds of rods, which blew my mind. Color vision in low light isn't something we usually hear about in the animal world. So imagine like when you're out at nighttime, instead of the world being kind of dim and gray, it's brighter. It's brighter looking because you have more rods, and you're seeing at least the blues and the grays. If you think about the natural world, it's mostly blues and greens, right?
Huh.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not seeing the reds, but there's not that many reds out at night that you're going to see anyways. So that just kind of blew my mind.
That's
I think
nuts.
if you picture like some of the footage you've seen of like stuff shot through like night vision goggles.
Sure.
And it's like it's artificially bright and green. We think maybe it might look kind of like that. Like they just kind of have like night vision goggles that's showing up blue and green kind of at the same time. Which
That's super cool.
I love the visual of like a humble frog hopping around at night with essentially built-in night vision goggles. And
fully ready
one
in
of some of the
their
research
homemade ghillie suit.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the researchers I was reading said that they believe that frogs perhaps have the best night vision of any animals yet studied.
Wow.
Whoa.
Which, who would have thought it was frogs, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Now, as I said, we've only just begun to study the vision in frogs. Some of these were like really common species that were being studied. Like, for example, Rachel, you brought up some of the ones being dissected in classes, like bullfrogs and stuff like that. It was some of those really common ones that were studied.
Yeah.
There are some researchers that are just starting to go out to study other frogs and other habitats around the world to try to learn more about this vision that they have, because it's not widely studied at all. Just a handful of people in the world working on this.
They're out there chowing down on the mosquitoes at dusk and thank them for it. Now,
I'm going to leave you this week by coming back to where we started. Can frogs see rainbows? When I discovered that the frogs were trichromats, I thought I'd answer my question with a resounding yes. Frogs can see rainbows. At least theoretically, they're capable of seeing all the colors of the rainbow. But I have one final fact for you.
No.
Frogs are almost universally nearsighted, and they can only focus on objects about 6 inches away. And that means that the rainbows in the song and even the stars Kermit sings about, sadly, unless we start seeing him wearing glasses, he simply cannot see. They are too far away. So,
okay,
can frogs see rainbows?
We all know that Kermit is a very, very special frog. He can drive.
He's very special.
He can ride a bicycle.
Ride a bicycle.
I think he can
Maybe
see
he
the
wears
stars.
contacts, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. Could be. Can frogs see rainbows? I'm going to go, probably not. But their eyes are certainly cool, and they hold many more secrets for us to unlock. Some of my sources this week were Wikipedia, Billboard magazine, and then a number of journal articles. One was called The Effective Viewing Distance Upon Size Preference of Frogs for Prey by Ingle and Cook in the journal Vision Research. And then a really great one, Differences in Ocular Media Transmittance in Classical Frog and Toad Model Species and Its Impact on Visual Sensitivity. Doesn't sound like a page turner, but it's a really cool one. It was by Jovanovich et al. 2017 in the Journal of Experimental Biology. Available free online, by the way. Yay for open access science journals. We love that. And friends, that's what we have this week.
What a way
Thank you, Kirk.
to start the entire year.
Some pretty fun ones, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll see everybody next time, and have a great night.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. Good night.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's show. Be sure to subscribe. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and we love sharing this strange world with all our listeners. If you would be so kind as to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, that would be great. It lets other lovers of the strange discover the show. You can reach us by searching for Strange by Nature Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. You can send us an email as well. Our address is contact@strangebynaturepodcast.com. If you want more information about the show, you can check out our website, strangebynaturepodcast.com, and you can support the show and get ad-free episodes at patreon.com/strangebynature. Until next week, get outside, stay curious, and embrace the strange.